The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Clara Bennett stepped down onto the packed earth of Sweetwater, Texas, her navy traveling dress already clinging to her skin in the oppressive heat of July 1882, and she knew immediately that accepting the mail-order bride arrangement might have been the worst decision of her 21 years. The man who was supposed to meet her, a cattle rancher named William Morrison, was nowhere to be seen among the handful of rough-looking men loitering outside the general store. Instead, a broad-shouldered figure with a thick black mustache and cruel eyes approached her, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each deliberate step. He wore a foreman's hat and carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed the world owed him whatever he wanted. "You must be Morrison's bride," the man said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "Name's Hank Carlisle. I'm foreman at the Triple M Ranch." Clara straightened her spine, lifting her chin despite the exhaustion from 3 weeks of travel from Philadelphia. "I am Clara Bennett. Where is Mr. Morrison?" Hank's smile revealed yellowed teeth. "Old Bill took sick 2 days ago. Pneumonia got him quick. He's being buried tomorrow morning." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She gripped her carpetbag tighter, her knuckles going white. "He's dead?" "Dead as last year's grass." Hank stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath and the sharp tang of sweat. "But don't you worry none. Ranch still needs a woman's touch, and I'm second in command now. Reckon that makes you my problem to solve." Something in his tone made Clara's stomach turn. She took a step back, nearly tripping over her trunk. "I think perhaps I should return to Philadelphia. If you could help me with my luggage back to the stage depot." "Stage already left, sweetheart. Won't be another one for 3 days." Hank reached out and grabbed her upper arm, his fingers digging into her flesh through the fabric of her sleeve. "Besides, you came all this way. Shame to waste the trip. I got a nice little arrangement in mind. Remove your hand from me this instant." Clara tried to jerk away, but his grip only tightened. "You got fire. I like that in a woman." Hank's other hand moved toward her face, and Clara felt genuine fear spike through her chest. "Now, there's an old custom around these parts. Foreman gets first night with any new woman coming to the ranch. Consider it breaking you in proper before—" The hand never reached her face. A blur of motion came from Clara's left, and suddenly Hank was stumbling backward, his grip torn from her arm. A younger man, tall and lean with sun-bronzed skin and sandy hair that needed cutting, had inserted himself between Clara and the foreman. He wore the simple clothing of a working cowboy, his blue shirt faded from countless washings, his leather vest dusty from the trail. "The lady asked you to let go, Hank." The cowboy's voice was quiet, but it carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "Last I checked, a woman's words still mean something even in Sweetwater." Hank's face flushed dark red. "This ain't your business, Reed. Get back to the bunkhouse before I dock your pay." "Can't do that." The cowboy called Reed shifted his weight. His hands relaxed at his sides, but his body coiled like a spring ready to release. "She decides who touches her, not you." "I'm the foreman!" Hank roared, and his fist shot out toward Reed's jaw. Reed moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years in the saddle and more than a few nights settling disputes outside saloons. He ducked under the punch, and his own fist came up in a devastating uppercut that connected with Hank's chin with a crack that echoed off the storefronts. The foreman's head snapped back, his eyes rolled up, and he dropped to the ground like a sack of grain. Complete silence fell over the street. Clara stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Reed shook out his hand, wincing slightly, then turned to her. His eyes were hazel, she noticed, with flecks of gold that caught the afternoon sun. "Are you all right, miss?" His voice gentled when he spoke to her, and Clara found she could breathe again. Yes, thank you." She looked down at the unconscious foreman, then back at Reed. "Will there be trouble for you, I mean?" A wry smile tugged at the corner of Reed's mouth. "More than likely, but it was worth it." He tipped his hat to her. "Reed Walker, ma'am. I ride for the Triple M, or at least I did until about 2 minutes ago." Clara Bennett. She extended her hand without thinking, a gesture from her old life in Philadelphia society. Reed looked at her hand for a moment, surprised, then took it gently. His palm was calloused and warm, and something sparked between them at the contact, like static electricity on a dry winter day. An older man with a sheriff's star pinned to his vest emerged from the building across the street, moving with the careful slowness of someone with bad knees. He looked down at Hank's prone form and sighed heavily. "What happened here?" "Hank was bothering the lady, Sheriff Dawson." Reed released Clara's hand, though he seemed reluctant to do so. "I intervened." The sheriff's shrewd eyes moved from Reed to Clara. "That the truth, miss?" Clara nodded firmly. "He grabbed me and spoke of some barbaric custom about a first night. Mr. Walker defended me when I asked Mr. Carlisle to release me, and he refused." Sheriff Dawson's mouth tightened into a hard line. "Hank's been getting too big for his britches lately, been waiting for him to step over the line." He looked at Reed. "You got anywhere to stay, son? Because when he wakes up, he's going to want your hide." "I'll figure something out, sir." "Miss Bennett was supposed to marry William Morrison," the sheriff said, his tone softening. "Suppose you heard the news." "I heard Mr. Morrison passed." Clara's voice wavered slightly. "I find myself in rather difficult circumstances." The sheriff scratched his jaw. "Might be I can help with that. Widow Patterson runs a boarding house 2 streets over. She's always looking for help, and she's got a spare room. It ain't fancy, but it's clean and respectable." "I would be grateful for the introduction." Clara glanced at Reed, who was still watching her with those remarkable eyes. "And I owe Mr. Walker a debt I cannot easily repay." "You don't owe me nothing, Miss Bennett." Reed's voice was sincere. "Any decent man would have done the same." "But you were the one who did it?" Clara held his gaze, feeling that spark again, stronger this time. "That matters." Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat. "I'll take you to Mrs. Patterson's place. Reed, help me get Hank over to the jail cell. He can sleep off whatever demons are riding him, and we'll have a talk about respect when he wakes up." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a round-faced woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour permanently dusted on her apron. She took one look at Clara's exhausted face and immediately showed her to a small but comfortable room on the second floor, with a narrow bed covered in a cheerful quilt and a window that overlooked the main street. "You rest up, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, patting Clara's shoulder. "We'll talk about arrangements later. I could use help with the cooking and cleaning, and the room's yours in exchange for work if you're interested." "I'm very interested, thank you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness. "I do not know what I would have done without your generosity. We women got to look out for each other out here." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Besides, that Reed Walker's a good judge of character. If he saw fit to risk his job for you, then you must be worth knowing." After Mrs. Patterson left, Clara moved to the window and looked out at the dusty street below. Sweetwater was nothing like Philadelphia, with its cobblestone streets and brick buildings. This was a raw place, barely civilized, where men like Hank Carlisle thought they could take whatever they wanted. But it was also a place where men like Reed Walker stood up for what was right. Consequences be damned. She touched her arm where Hank had grabbed her, then touched her hand where Reed had held it. The contrast could not have been more stark. 3 days passed before Clara saw Reed again. She spent the time settling into a routine at the boarding house, helping Mrs. Patterson with the cooking and serving meals to the handful of residents, mostly older men who worked at the mercantile or the bank. She learned the rhythms of the small town, the way the heat built throughout the day until it was almost unbearable, the way everyone knew everyone else's business. She heard through gossip that Hank Carlisle had been fired from the Triple M Ranch by the owner's son, who had ridden in from Denver when he got word of both his father's death and the foreman's behavior. She heard that Reed Walker had been offered the foreman position but had turned it down, preferring to work as a regular ranch hand. She heard that Hank had left Sweetwater with a black eye and a bruised ego, heading south toward the border. On the 4th day, Clara was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when she heard boots on the wooden steps. She turned, a wet sheet in her hands, and there was Reed Walker, hat in hand, looking uncertain in a way that made him seem younger than his 24 years. "Mr. Walker?" She felt her cheeks warm and silently cursed her fair complexion that showed every blush. "I did not expect to see you." "I've been meaning to come by." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Wanted to make sure you were settling in all right." "Thanks to you, I am." Clara hung the sheet on the line, then wiped her damp hands on her apron. "I heard what happened with Mr. Carlisle. I'm glad he is gone." "Me too." Reed's jaw tightened. Man like that doesn't deserve to be around decent folk. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the summer breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant cattle. Clara found herself noticing details about him. The way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the gentleness in his eyes that contrasted with the obvious strength of his frame. "Would you like some lemonade?" The words tumbled out before she could think better of them. "Mrs. Patterson made some this morning, and it is quite good." Reed's face brightened. "That sounds real nice, ma'am." "Please, call me Clara. I think we are past formalities after you knocked a man unconscious on my behalf." A grin spread across Reed's face, transforming it. "Only if you call me Reed." They sat on the back porch steps, drinking lemonade from tin cups and talking in the shade of the overhang. Clara learned that Reed had come to Texas from Missouri 5 years ago, looking for work and a fresh start after his parents died of typhoid. He had worked his way up from stable hand to cowboy, learning the trade from older ranch hands who took pity on a skinny 18-year-old who knew nothing about cattle, but was willing to work himself to the bone to learn. "What made you come all the way from Philadelphia?" Reed asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "That is a long way to travel to marry a stranger." Clara looked down at her cup, watching the condensation drip down the sides. "My father died 2 years ago, leaving debts I did not know about. My mother passed when I was young. I had no siblings, no close family. I was working as a governess, but the family I worked for was moving to Boston and did not want to take me with them. I saw Mr. Morrison's advertisement in the paper, and it seemed like an opportunity, a chance to be something more than a dependent passed from household to household. You wanted to belong somewhere." Reed's voice was soft with understanding. "Yes." Clara looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Is that foolish?" "No." He shook his head slowly. "That is about the least foolish thing I have ever heard." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Clara could not quite name but felt all the way to her bones. Then Mrs. Patterson called from inside, needing help with dinner preparations, and the spell broke. "I should go." Reed stood, settling his hat back on his head. "But I was wondering, there is a barn dance next Saturday at the Henderson place just outside of town. Would you consider letting me escort you?" Clara's heart leaped. "I would like that very much." "Good." Reed's smile was worth more than all the gold in California. "I will come by around 6, if that suits you." "It suits me perfectly." The week until the dance seemed to last forever and pass in a blink simultaneously. Clara found herself thinking about Reed at odd moments, while kneading bread dough, while sweeping the floors, while lying in bed at night listening to the distant howl of coyotes. She had never felt this way about anyone, certainly not about William Morrison, who had been little more than a name on a piece of paper and a vague hope for security. Mrs. Patterson noticed, of course. Women like her noticed everything. "That Reed Walker is a good man," she said one afternoon while they were peeling potatoes. "Not a mean bone in his body, but strong where it counts. The kind of man you can build a life with." "We have only spoken a few times," Clara protested, but she could not keep the smile from her face. "Sometimes a few times is all it takes." Mrs. Patterson winked. "When my Harold first came courting, I knew after one conversation that he was the man I would marry. The heart knows faster than the head, dear." Clara thought about that as she prepared for the dance on Saturday evening. She had brought only a few dresses with her from Philadelphia, and most were too heavy for the Texas heat. but she had one dress of pale green cotton with small white flowers embroidered at the collar and cuffs that her mother had made years ago. She put it on carefully, pinned her dark hair up in a simple style, and studied herself in the small mirror. She looked different than she had a week ago, less like a frightened mail-order bride, and more like a woman who knew her own mind. The thought pleased her. Reed arrived exactly at 6, driving a borrowed wagon that had been scrubbed clean for the occasion. He wore his best shirt, dark blue with pearl buttons, and his hair was still damp from washing. When he saw Clara, his eyes widened. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Clara's cheeks flush with pleasure. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The Henderson Ranch was about 3 miles outside of Sweetwater, and the drive gave them time to talk more. Reed told her about his work, about the rhythms of ranch life, about his dreams of someday having a small spread of his own. Clara told him about Philadelphia, about the libraries and theaters and parks she had loved, about teaching the children of wealthy families and trying not to resent how easy their lives were compared to hers. "Do you miss it?" Reed asked. "The city, I mean." Clara considered the question carefully. "I miss parts of it, but I do not miss feeling like I was always on the outside looking in, always dependent on others' charity. Here, I'm building something of my own, even if it is just a place at Mrs. Patterson's table and honest work to fill my days. That is worth more than people realize." Reed glanced at her, his expression serious. "Being able to stand on your own feet." The Henderson barn had been decorated with lanterns and wildflowers, and a 3-piece band was already playing when they arrived. Dozens of people filled the space, ranchers and their families, shop owners, hands from the various spreads around Sweetwater. It was a glimpse into the community Clara was slowly becoming part of, and she felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Reed was not the best dancer Clara had ever partnered with, but he was enthusiastic and careful not to step on her feet, and his hand at her waist felt right in a way she could not explain. They danced 2 waltzes and a lively reel that left them both laughing and breathless. "I need some air," Clara said, fanning herself with her hand. "Come on." Reed led her outside, where the evening air was slightly cooler and filled with the chirping of crickets. They walked away from the barn, following a path that led to a small creek lined with cottonwood trees. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the water. Clara sat on a fallen log, and Reed settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "This is lovely," Clara said softly. "Peaceful?" "Yeah." But Reed was not looking at the creek. He was looking at her. "Clara, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "I know we have not known each other long, just over a week really, and I know you came here expecting something completely different." Reed took a deep breath. "But I cannot stop thinking about you. From the moment I saw Hank grabbing you, something in me just knew. You were someone worth protecting, someone special." "Reed," Clara's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I am not a rich man. I have about $200 saved and a good horse in my saddle. But I work hard and I am honest, and I would spend every day of my life making sure you were safe and happy if you would give me the chance." He turned to face her fully, taking her hand in both of his. "I know it is too soon to talk about forever, but I am asking if you would consider letting me court you proper, to see if what I am feeling might be something you feel too." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, the kind that came from unexpected joy. "I feel it too, Reed. I have felt it since you stepped between me and Hank, since you looked at me like I was a person worth defending and not just a problem to be dealt with. You are worth defending." Reed lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You are worth everything." She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed him softly on the mouth. Reed froze for a heartbeat, surprised, then kissed her back with a tenderness that made Clara's heart ache in the best possible way. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin, and Clara felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Reed rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to marry you someday, Clara Bennett, if you will have me." "I will have you," she whispered, "today, tomorrow, always." They sat by the creek until the music from the barn grew quiet, talking about everything and nothing, stealing kisses that grew less tentative and more confident as the night wore on. Clara felt like she had finally found what she had been searching for without even knowing it. Not just security or a place to belong, but someone who saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he found. The courtship that followed was the happiest time of Clara's life. Reed came to the boarding house every evening after work, sitting on the porch with her and Mrs. Patterson, talking about their days and making plans for the future. On Sundays, they went to church together, and afterward, they would walk along the creek or ride out to see the wildflowers that bloomed in the hills around Sweetwater. Reed taught Clara to ride properly, not the sedate side-saddle trotting she had done in Philadelphia's parks, but real riding, astride with her skirts hiked up in a way that would have scandalized her former employers. She loved the freedom of it, the wind in her hair, and the powerful muscles of the horse beneath her. Reed riding beside her with encouragement and laughter. Clara taught Reed to read better, discovering that his education had been cut short when his parents died. They sat together in the evenings with books borrowed from the small library in the church, her shoulder pressed against his as they worked through the words together. Reed was a quick study, hungry for knowledge, and Clara loved watching his face light up when he mastered a difficult passage. 2 months after the night of the barn dance, Reed took Clara riding out to a spot he had found in the hills. It was a natural meadow surrounded by oaks with a view that stretched for miles across the rolling Texas landscape. A small spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a pool of clear water. "This is where I want to build our house," Reed said, dismounting and helping Clara down from her horse. "If you like it, I mean. I've been saving every penny, and I talked to the land office. I can file a claim on this section." Clara turned in a slow circle, taking in the beauty of the spot. She could picture it. A simple house with a wide porch, maybe a vegetable garden near the spring, a barn for horses and a few cattle. A place that would be theirs, built by their own hands and hard work. "It is perfect," she said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Reed pulled a small box from his pocket, his hands trembling slightly. "I know I said I would court you proper, and it has only been 2 months, but Clara Bennett, I have never been more sure of anything in my life." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small emerald set in it. "This was my mother's ring. It is the only thing of hers I have left. Will you marry me?" Clara's tears came fast and hot, streaming down her cheeks as she nodded frantically. "Yes, yes, Reed, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Then he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, dizzy with joy and the certain knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Sweetwater, with Mrs. Patterson and Sheriff Dawson standing up as witnesses. Clara wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and pearls she borrowed from the banker's wife. Reed wore his best suit, brushed and pressed, his sandy hair slicked back and his eyes shining with love. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Reed kissed Clara with enough passion to make Mrs. Patterson fan herself and Sheriff Dawson clear his throat. Clara did not care. She was Mrs. Reed Walker now, and nothing in her life had ever felt so right. They spent their wedding night in the small room at the boarding house, which Mrs. Patterson had decorated with wildflowers and given them as a wedding present along with her blessing. Reed was gentle and patient, and if they were both nervous at first, they found their way to each other with whispered words and tender touches that spoke of love and commitment. Afterward, lying in Reed's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Clara thought about how strange life was. She had come to Sweetwater expecting to marry a man she had never met out of desperation and duty. Instead, she had found Reed, who made her laugh and challenged her to be brave and looked at her like she hung the moon in the sky. "What are you thinking?" Reed asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I am thinking that I am grateful." Clara propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "For everything. For Hank being horrible, because it brought you to me. For this town and these people and this life we are building. I am grateful too." Reed tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I used to think I would always be alone, just drifting from place to place. Then you stepped off that stagecoach, and everything changed. She decides who touches." Clara repeated Reed's words from that first day, smiling. "You gave me back my choice, my voice. That is what I love most about you, Reed Walker. You see me as an equal." "You are more than my equal." Reed pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "You are my everything." The next months were a flurry of activity. Reed continued working at the Triple M Ranch while saving every dollar he could. Clara kept helping Mrs. Patterson, but also took in sewing and mending to add to their savings. On weekends and evenings, they rode out to their land and began preparing it for building. The community rallied around them in the way small towns did. The men from the ranch helped Reed fell trees and square logs for the house. The women brought food and advice and willing hands to help Clara plant a garden. Sheriff Dawson donated some old furniture his late wife had treasured. Mrs. Patterson gave them dishes and quilts and all the wisdom she had accumulated in 30 years of marriage. By the time winter came, they had a small but sturdy house with 2 rooms and a loft, a stone fireplace that Reed had built with his own hands, and windows with real glass that had cost a fortune but were worth it to see Clara's face light up. They moved in just before the first snow, carrying their meager belongings and their enormous hopes. Their first night in the house, they christened every room with laughter and love. They cooked dinner together in the kitchen, danced to music only they could hear in the main room, and made love in front of the fireplace on a pile of quilts while snow fell softly outside the windows. "This is home," Clara whispered, wrapped in Reed's arms as the fire crackled. "Finally, truly home." "Home is wherever you are," Reed murmured against her hair. "The house is just walls and a roof. You are what makes it matter." Spring came, and with it, the hard work of building a ranch. Reed bought 6 head of cattle with their savings, and Clara started raising chickens and planted a larger garden. They worked from dawn until dusk, exhausted and happy, falling into bed each night too tired to do anything but hold each other. But on the nights when they were not quite so exhausted, they came together with a passion that never seemed to fade. Reed worshipped Clara's body with his hands and mouth, learning every place that made her gasp and sigh. Clara grew bolder, exploring Reed's body with curiosity and growing confidence, delighting in the way she could make this strong, capable man tremble with want. In late summer, Clara missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then told Reed over breakfast one morning, her hands shaking as she set down his coffee, "I think I am with child." Reed's fork clattered to his plate. He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes wide. Then a grin split his face so wide it must have hurt. He jumped up, knocking over his chair in his haste, and scooped Clara into his arms. "We are going to have a baby?" His voice cracked with emotion. "Truly?" "Truly." Clara laughed through her tears. "Are you happy?" "Happy? Clara, I am." Reed set her down carefully, like she was made of spun glass, and placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "I am beyond happy. I am blessed. We are blessed." The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and Reed fretted over her like a mother hen, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, rubbing her feet when they swelled, doing double duty with the chores so she could rest. Mrs. Patterson came to visit regularly, bringing advice and supplies and her calm, reassuring presence. As Clara's belly grew round with their child, Reed became even more protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy or work in the garden during the heat of the day. He built a rocking chair for the main room and spent his evenings talking to her belly, telling their unborn child stories about horses and cattle and the stars that wheeled overhead at night. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Clara said one evening, watching Reed with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "I hope so." Reed looked up at her, his hand still resting on her belly where the baby was kicking. "I want to give our child everything I did not have: stability, love, a home that is always safe." "You will." Clara covered his hand with hers. "We will. Together." The baby came on a cold March night in 1884, arriving after 14 hours of labor that left Clara exhausted and Reed white-faced with worry. Mrs. Patterson served as midwife, her capable hands guiding Clara through the pain, with the assurance of someone who had helped bring dozens of babies into the world. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Mrs. Patterson announced, "It is a boy." Reed, who had been pacing outside despite Clara's insistence that he stay, burst through the door at the sound of the cry. He stumbled to the bed where Clara lay, sweaty and exhausted and more beautiful than he had ever seen her, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a clean blanket. "A son," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Reed, we have a son." Reed knelt beside the bed, his own eyes wet, and touched the baby's impossibly small hand with one finger. The baby's fingers closed around Reed's finger with surprising strength, and Reed let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I am your papa, and I promise you I will spend every day of my life making sure you know how loved you are." They named him Samuel, after Reed's father, and from the moment he entered the world, Samuel Reed Walker was the center of their universe. Reed proved to be every bit the devoted father Clara had known he would be, walking the floor with Samuel when he cried in the night, changing nappies without complaint, singing lullabies in his off-key but heartfelt voice. Clara had never felt more complete. Watching Reed with their son, seeing the gentleness in those capable hands, the love in those hazel eyes, she knew beyond any doubt that she had found her place in the world, not just geographically, but emotionally and spiritually. She belonged here, with this man, building this life. The years that followed were full of hard work and small triumphs. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Reed proved to have a gift for breeding cattle, developing a reputation for quality stock. Clara's garden flourished, and she started selling preserves and pickles to the general store in Sweetwater. They hired a young hand named Tom to help with the work, a quiet boy from Oklahoma who treated Samuel like a little brother. Samuel grew into a bright, curious child with his mother's dark hair and his father's hazel eyes. He toddled after Reed around the ranch, mimicking his father's walk and trying to help with chores in the endearing but ineffective way of toddlers. Clara taught him his letters and numbers, reading to him every night from the growing collection of books they accumulated. When Samuel was 3, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was chasing after an energetic toddler and had no time to focus on her discomfort. Reed was just as attentive but less frantic, confident now in a way he had not been the first time. Their daughter, Elizabeth Ann, was born on a beautiful spring morning in 1887. She had Reed's sandy hair and Clara's blue eyes, and she was every bit as perfect as her brother. Samuel, who had been worried he would not like a sibling, took one look at his tiny sister and declared her the best baby ever. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered enough that they were able to add on to the house, building 2 bedrooms for the children and expanding the kitchen. Reed bought more land, and their herd grew to nearly 50 head of cattle. Clara became known throughout the county for her cooking and her kindness, always ready to help a neighbor in need. They made the trip to Sweetwater every week for supplies and church, and the town that had seemed so foreign and hostile that first day became home. Clara had friends among the other ranch wives, women who understood the particular challenges and joys of frontier life. Reed was respected as an honest businessman and a fair employer. Their children were welcomed and loved by the community, but it was the moments at home, just the four of them, that Clara treasured most. Evenings when they sat on the porch after the children were in bed, Reed's arm around her shoulders, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Mornings when Samuel and Elizabeth would climb into their bed at dawn, burrowing between them for warmth and cuddles before the day's work began. Sundays after church, when they would have a picnic by the creek, and Reed would teach Samuel to fish while Clara and Elizabeth picked wildflowers. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Reed surprised Clara with a gift. He led her out to the barn, where he had built a small addition onto the back. "What is this?" Clara asked, puzzled. "Open the door." Inside was a room with shelves lining the walls, a comfortable chair by a window, and a small desk. Sunlight streamed through the window, making the space warm and inviting. "I know you miss having access to books and learning," Reed said softly. "So I am building you a library. It will take time to fill the shelves, but I've already ordered some books from a catalog. And I thought maybe you could use the space to teach Samuel and Elizabeth, and maybe some of the other children around here whose parents cannot afford a real teacher." Clara turned to him, tears streaming down her face for what felt like the 1,000th time since she had met this impossible man. "Reed Walker, how did I get so lucky? I ask myself the same thing every day." He pulled her close, kissing her softly. "You gave up everything to come west, and you got stuck with me instead of a rich rancher. Sometimes I worry you regret it." "Never." Clara gripped his shirt, fierce in her certainty. "Never for 1 second have I regretted it. You gave me something William Morrison never could have. You gave me choice, respect, partnership. You gave me love, real love, the kind that grows deeper every day. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. You gave me all those things too." Reed rested his forehead against hers. "I was just drifting before you. Now I have a purpose, a reason to build something that will last." They stood there in the library that would become Clara's sanctuary, holding each other as the sunlight shifted around them. Outside they could hear Samuel and Elizabeth playing, their laughter bright and clear. Inside, 2 people who had found each other against all odds renewed their commitment to the life they were building together. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew tall and strong, with his father's work ethic and his mother's quick mind. He loved the ranch and everything about it, and Reed began teaching him the intricacies of breeding and managing cattle. Elizabeth was more interested in books and learning, spending hours in her mother's library, but she could ride as well as any boy and had a fierce protective streak when it came to her family. Clara's informal school grew, and soon she was teaching 6 children from neighboring ranches 3 times a week. The library shelves filled with books purchased from catalogs and sent by Reed's cousin in Missouri, who had inherited the family farm and was happy to reconnect with the nephew he had lost track of years ago. The connection to Reed's past, the knowledge that he had not been completely alone in the world, meant everything to him. When Samuel was 10 and Elizabeth 7, a traveling photographer came through Sweetwater offering to take family portraits. Clara insisted they have one made, wanting to capture this moment in their lives. They dressed in their Sunday best and rode into town, where the photographer arranged them in front of a painted backdrop. Reed sat in a chair with Clara standing beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Samuel stood tall on Reed's other side, already showing signs of the man he would become. Elizabeth sat on Clara's lap, her expression serious as she tried to stay still for the long exposure. When the photograph came back weeks later, Clara studied it with wonder. They looked like what they were, a family, strong and united and happy. The struggles of those early days seemed like a distant dream. The fear and uncertainty of that first day in Sweetwater, when Hank Carlisle had grabbed her and her whole future had hung in the balance, felt like it had happened to someone else. But it had happened to her, and it had led her here to this life, to this love. One evening, when Clara was putting Elizabeth to bed, her daughter asked, "Mama, how did you and Papa meet?" Clara smiled, smoothing her daughter's hair back from her forehead. "That is quite a story. Are you sure you want to hear it now? It is past your bedtime." "Please?" Elizabeth's blue eyes were wide and pleading. "All right." Clara settled on the edge of the bed. "I came to Texas on a stagecoach, planning to marry a man I had never met. But when I arrived, that man had died, and I was alone and frightened in a place I did not know." "That is sad." Elizabeth's bottom lip trembled. It was sad. But then something happened that changed everything. A bad man tried to hurt me, to claim he had some right to me just because I was a woman alone. And your father, who I had never even met before, stepped in front of me and told that man something very important. What did he say? He said that I got to decide who touched me, that my words and my choices mattered. And then he protected me, even though it meant he might lose his job or get hurt. He did it because it was right, because he believed I deserved respect and safety. Elizabeth thought about this seriously. Papa is very brave. He is, but more than that, he is good. And that goodness, that respect he showed me from the very first moment, that is what made me fall in love with him. Not his bravery, though that helped, but the fact that he saw me as a person with my own voice and my own right to choose. I love Papa. Elizabeth yawned, her eyes starting to droop. "I do too, sweetheart. More than I can ever say." Clara kissed her daughter's forehead. "Now sleep. We have lessons tomorrow." When Clara returned to the main room, she found Reed sitting by the fire, mending a saddle. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that crossed his face was the same one he had given her that first day outside the general store. Warm, genuine, full of quiet affection. "Children asleep?" he asked. "Finally." Clara sat beside him on the settee, curling into his side with the ease of long practice. Elizabeth wanted to hear how we met. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that you defended me when no one else would, that you gave me back my voice and my choice, that you showed me what real love looks like." Reed set aside the saddle and pulled Clara into his lap, holding her close. "You know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if I had not been in town that day? If I had been out on the range, and someone else had been there when Hank grabbed you? But you were there." Clara cupped his face in her hands. "You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there. I do not believe in fate, but I believe in that moment. It brought us together. I would have found you somehow." Reed's voice was fierce with conviction. "Even if it took longer, even if the path was different, I would have found you, because you are my home. Clara, you are my heart." They kissed there by the firelight with the same passion and tenderness that had marked all the years of their marriage. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Clara rested her head on Reed's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "Do you ever regret not taking the foreman position?" she asked. "You could have had more power, more money." "Never." Reed's answer was immediate and certain. "I have everything I need right here. You, our children, our ranch, our life. What more could any man want?" "I feel the same way." Clara traced patterns on Reed's chest. "Sometimes I think about that version of myself who stepped off the stagecoach, so frightened and uncertain. I wish I could tell her that everything would work out better than she could have possibly imagined." "She would not believe you," Reed chuckled. "She would think you were crazy." "Probably," Clara smiled, "but she would have been wrong." The years continued their steady march. Samuel grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the ranch work as Reed's hair began to show threads of silver. Elizabeth attended a teaching college in Austin for 2 years, then returned to Sweetwater to help her mother with the school, which had grown to include 15 students. Clara and Reed aged together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. They added a rocking chair to match the one Reed had built so many years ago, and in the evenings they would sit side by side on the porch holding hands and watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Samuel married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch when he was 22, and they built a house on the other side of the Walker property. Within a year, Clara and Reed became grandparents to a beautiful baby girl they named Grace. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Reed wept openly, overwhelmed by the continuation of the life he and Clara had created. Elizabeth surprised them by falling in love with Tom, the ranch hand who had worked for them for over 15 years. He was steady and kind, and he looked at Elizabeth the way Reed looked at Clara, like she was the most precious thing in the world. They married in a simple ceremony at the ranch, and Tom officially became part of the family he had always considered his own. On Clara and Reed's 20th wedding anniversary, their family gathered for a celebration. Samuel and his wife brought Grace, now 3 years old, and their new baby son. Elizabeth and Tom came bearing a cake Elizabeth had baked. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 70s but still spry, made the journey from Sweetwater with her niece. They ate and laughed and told stories on the porch Clara and Reed had built together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Reed stood and raised his glass. "I want to say something," he announced, his voice carrying across the assembled group. 20 years ago, I met a woman who changed my life. She was brave and beautiful and stronger than she knew. She could have chosen bitterness after the way life had treated her, but instead she chose hope. She chose to build something new with a cowboy who had nothing to offer but his love and his labor. Clara felt tears prick her eyes as Reed turned to look at her. "Clara, you have given me more than I ever dreamed possible. You have given me children and grandchildren, a home, a purpose. You have given me your trust and your love and your partnership. Every single day, I thank God that I was in Sweetwater that afternoon, that I was there to tell Hank Carlisle the truth that should be obvious to everyone, that she decides who touches her, that women are not property to be claimed, but people to be respected and loved." The group erupted in applause. Clara stood and went to Reed, kissing him soundly while their family cheered. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "From that first moment until my last breath, I will love you." "And I love you," Reed replied, "always and forever." As the evening wore on and their family continued to celebrate around them, Clara and Reed slipped away to the creek where Reed had proposed all those years ago. The cottonwoods had grown taller, and the path was more worn, but the magic of the place remained unchanged. They sat on the same fallen log, now weathered by time, and Reed pulled Clara close. Above them, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, countless points of light against the endless Texas night. "Do you remember what you said to me here?" Reed asked softly. "When I proposed?" "I said yes," Clara smiled, rather emphatically if I recall. "You said you would have me today, tomorrow, always." Reed kissed her temple. "That is still true for me. Today, tomorrow, always, Clara, you are my everything. And you are mine." Clara turned to kiss him properly, deeply, with all the love and passion of 20 years together. "My protector, my partner, my heart. Thank you for giving me back my voice that day. Thank you for seeing me as an equal. Thank you for loving me the way every person deserves to be loved." "Thank you for choosing me," Reed replied, "for building this life with me, for making every day an adventure." They sat there by the creek as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something extraordinary from the raw materials of respect, love, and hard work. Their children and grandchildren were back at the house, carrying on their legacy. Their ranch stretched around them, a testament to what could be accomplished when two people worked together toward a common dream. Clara thought back to that terrified woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Sweetwater 20 years ago, desperate and alone, facing an uncertain future in a hostile land. She wished she could tell that woman that the fear would pass, that the uncertainty would give way to the most beautiful certainty she could imagine, that the cruel foreman who tried to claim her would be knocked cold cold by a cowboy who understood a simple but profound truth, that she had the right to decide her own fate. That cowboy had become her husband, the father of her children, her partner in all things. He had taken a broken situation and turned it into something beautiful, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though there had been plenty of both over the years, but through daily acts of love and respect and partnership. "What are you thinking?" Reed asked, reading her expression the way he had learned to do over 2 decades together. "I am thinking that I would not change a single thing," Clara said honestly. "Not the fear of that first day, not the uncertainty, not any of the hard times we have faced, because all of it led us here, to this moment, to this life." "Even Hank Carlisle?" Reed's tone was light, but Clara knew he was serious. "Even Hank Carlisle," she confirmed, "because he gave you the opportunity to show me who you were, to prove that not all men are like him, that there are good men in this world who see women as human beings deserving of respect and autonomy. You changed my life that day, Reed Walker, and I have spent every day since being grateful for it." Reed held her tighter, and they sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. In the distance, they could hear laughter from the house, the sound of their family enjoying each other's company. It was a sound that filled Clara with profound contentment. Eventually, they walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to rejoin the celebration. As they approached the porch, Clara paused and looked up at the house they had built together. Lamplight glowed in the windows, and the sound of music drifted out into the night. "This is everything I never knew I wanted," she said softly. Reed squeezed her hand. "Me too." They climbed the porch steps together, entering the warm circle of their family's love. And as the celebration continued into the night, Clara and Reed stood side by side, partners in all things, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in unison, their love a living testament to the power of respect, choice, and the courage to stand up for what is right. The years would continue to pass, bringing new joys and inevitable sorrows, but Clara and Reed would face them all together. Because that was what they had promised each other on a moonlit night by a creek in Texas. Today, tomorrow, always. And it was a promise they would keep until the very end of their days. 2 souls who had found each other when they needed it most, and built a love that would echo through generations. Their grandchildren would tell their own children the story of how Great-Grandpa Reed had knocked a cruel foreman cold when he tried to claim Great-Grandma Clara, how he had stood up and declared that she decided who touched her. It would become family legend, a story about courage and respect and the beginning of a great love. But for Clara and Reed, it was simply the truth of how they had found each other, and that truth, lived out every day in countless small moments of love and partnership, was more precious than any legend could ever be. It was real, and it was theirs, and it was everything.